Yeah, I mean, Kyle Brady was my guy growing up. For that memorable, like kind of 98 to 2004 Jaguars era, where they dominated the league without ever making a Super Bowl.
Hey, what's going on, everybody? Welcome into Monkey Knife Fights NFL Preview Show, Week 7 edition, and it's a bit of a light week this week. First off, I'm Dan Watkins. Thanks for joining us, and joining me, as always, on Friday is Nick Whalen of Rotowire.com. Nick, bye weeks this week, 6 teams on the bye, including your Jacksonville Jaguars, fresh off their first win, so congratulations to you. Have you taken your victory lap yet?
I sure have. A well-deserved bye week for the Jacksonville Jaguars, who snapped that 20-game losing streak over in London last week. It was a game we had to sweat out. I don't think it was a convincing victory by any means, but nonetheless, they got it done. I got home on Sunday and the neighborhood threw a parade for me. I came out and, everybody's throwing their hats and banging on pots and pans. And, I kind of got my moment in the sun. But I'm just so relieved that the streak is over. We've talked about it a number of times on the show. I was getting very nervous, like the winnable games, were starting to dwindle before they were on the verge of maybe setting the NFL record for consecutive losses. So honestly, I don't care if they win a game the rest of the way. I'm just glad that, one, they're not going to be the first team to go 0-17, and two, they're no longer in danger of breaking that record.
Yep. All it took was taking a trip across the pond to play the Miami Dolphins, who are in a bit of a mess right now. They are just absolutely in shambles. We'll talk a little bit about the Dolphins later on, but week 7 getting off to an exciting start. The D'Ernest Johnson game. I mean, where did this guy come from? Nick Chubb, Kareem Hunt, both getting hurt. They're out in Cleveland. It's kind of like an assembly line of running backs there, apparently, in Cleveland. And D'Ernest Johnson just goes off. And I think he's just a great story, too. You see the tweets Thursday night coming out about how he DM'd every single team in the AAF 2-3 years ago now, trying to get a tryout. And now the dude's shining on Thursday Night Football. So any thoughts for D'Ernest this week?
No, I think all the praise is well deserved. Watching that game last night, didn't really look like too much of a step down from Nick Chubb or Kareem Hunt, which is not necessarily the most positive indictment on the like running back still matter argument when you could pick up a guy who's DMing AAF teams not that long ago and he looks like a stud in the NFL. But at the same time, I think this guy's a real talent. I mean, you can tell people who watch football, even when you're looking at a second or a third string running back, like there are certain guys that pop off the screen. And D'Ernest Johnson, fits that mold, certainly. He had a couple of huge runs to close that out in that final drive for Cleveland, where that game, I think, was starting to turn about as ugly as it looked like it might, given the quarterback situation, given the injury situation for both teams. And when you can just hand it to your off the street, third running back on the depth chart and he can bring you home, that was huge. For Cleveland to get through this game with all those injuries, with Baker out, this may have been like a backbreaking loss for the Cleveland Browns. And maybe it was for the Denver Broncos, who now dropped to under 500. But to escape that game at home, again, on a short week, huge for Cleveland, a team that still very much has its eyes on the postseason.
Yep. And let's go right in and let's talk more about some AFC teams here this week. The early slate is highlighted by Chiefs at the Titans. You got a good quarterback matchup between Patrick Mahomes and Ryan Tannehill. The Titans, of course, coming off that big Monday night win where they beat the Buffalo Bills. And the Chiefs, they beat the Washington football team last week. So both these teams kind of flying high here. Patrick Mahomes, his more or less total this week it's a big one. 327.5 for Mahomes. He's been over that number just 3 of 6 times so far this year, and just once in the last 4 weeks. But this Tennessee Titans defense has struggled quite a bit. They're bottom third in the league against the pass. They're giving up about 276 pass yards in this season per game. And one career regular season game against the Titans for Mahomes, he was 36 of 50, 446 yards and 3 touchdowns. And then, of course, that AFC Championship game a couple of years ago, he finished with right around 300. So what do you think about Patrick Mahomes this week? And does Tyreek Hill's status play into this at all for you?
Yeah, I mean, it certainly does. This KC offense, when everybody's healthy, it looks pretty loaded on paper. But, you start to take away one of those elite weapons potentially, and things change pretty quickly. You have a lot of guys who, I'm thinking like the McCole Hardman types who, like that speed is so appealing. But, if that guy has to become like maybe your number 1 or number 2 target, all of a sudden you don't feel quite as confident about it. Looking at Mahomes total on MKF, I do like the more here this week. I think he's getting a Tennessee defense that is not very good. There are very few teams that are allowing more net yards per attempt than Tennessee. And one of those teams is the Kansas City Chiefs. And the Chiefs are also a bottom 2 rush defense. They're 31st in the league in yards per attempt on the ground. And the Tennessee Titans have the best running back that we've seen maybe since peak Adrian Peterson. So I think this is going to be a high scoring game that maybe looks a lot like that Titans Bills game last week, where it's back and forth. It's high scoring. Kansas City is going to need to score with the Tennessee Titans, because I think the Titans are going to put up points on this Chiefs defense. So Dan, like it's been really hard to get a read on this Chiefs team. Like, do we think that the Chiefs are a good team right now, or are they a bad team that has a really good quarterback that's kind of keeping them afloat? Like, they've been so hard for me to read week to week.
I think Mahomes is just so good that he's pulling up everybody else there. And I mean, defense is definitely had its struggles, and that kind of plays into our other guy here, the other quarterback in this matchup, Ryan Tannehill. His more or less is 255.5, and he's only gone over that number just 2 of 7 games so far this season, or 2 of 6 games so far this season. Yeah, just 2 of 6. And then in his career against Kansas City, 3 times he's played them, his highest yardage output is just 209 yards. So it's a bit interesting here against this Chiefs defense, which it feels like everybody can pick up yards on them if they want to. So how do you feel about the game plan for the Titans this week? And you got AJ Brown, who's apparently sick, and Julio Jones still a little banged up as well too.
Chipotle, he's sick because he had Chipotle.
Yeah, he's made that very clear that he's been sick, providing us with like hourly updates on what's going on there. So thank you to AJ Brown, I guess, for the transparency. You don't see that a lot in modern sports, but I think on paper you look at how bad this KC defense is, and my first inclination is to go more on Tannehill, but 255 is a little bit higher of a number than I'd like. That was a great stat, Dan. That he's barely cleared 200 yards on average in those 3 previous matchups against KC. And this Kansas City Chiefs defense might be the worst of them all. They've all kind of been iffy since Mahomes took over, but with some of the injuries that they have and some of the questions and deterioration in the secondary, especially, I mean, this is legitimately easily a bottom 5 defense in the entire league right now. The question is, what's the split between, rushing and passing? Like, I think Tennessee, and I think you would agree with me, Dan, like, I think they're going to put up a lot of yards, but the question is, if they put up 450 yards, is Derrick Henry running for 220 of those? Or do the Chiefs sell out to stop Derrick Henry, and that opens things up for Ryan Tannehill through the air? I think I'm going to go just less, I guess, on that 255.5 total. I think Tannehill comfortably gets over 200. I think he can approach 250, but I think they're going to make Kansas City stop Derrick Henry on the ground, and I don't know that KC is going to be very successful in that. So if Tennessee can rely on Derrick Henry just churning out yards throughout the game, eating clock, I think they'll be fine with that.
Yeah, let's talk about Derrick Henry here. An absolute monster total for Monkey Knife Fight for an NFL running back. I mean, these 129.5 is his prop this week. And that's like a number we usually talk about on our college football show for college running backs, never in the NFL. That number is just ridiculous. But if there's anyone that's deserving of it, it's King Henry. I mean, is there any reason to think he slows down? Chris Jones he's banged up. We don't know if he's going to play in the middle there. And if he's out, it doesn't even matter. I mean, you see, he just throws people. It does not matter with King Henry. I kind of want to go the more here because I just don't think Kansas City can stop him.
Me neither, right? I mean, I think there was maybe some expectation this season that after the workload that Derrick Henry took on these last couple of years, that like maybe things would start to catch up to him, whether it's injuries or just like general fatigue from toting the ball that many times. But here we are now heading into week 7, and he leads the league by like 250 yards. In rushing. There's only 2 guys who are averaging 100 yards per game so far. It's Derrick Henry at 130.5 per game, and then it's Nick Chubb all the way down at 104.6. And obviously Nick Chubb has now missed a game. It's been unbelievable what he's doing. I mean, he has no fumbles on the year. He's for being such a big guy who, he's probably the best goal line back. He's the best like mid yardage back. You just need you have a 3rd and 6 and you want to hand it to somebody. And like at the same time, he's also maybe the biggest big play back in the league. He's for as big as he is, he can still break a 75-yarder at a moment's notice. I think you have to keep riding Derrick Henry in this matchup. I think you don't want to overthink it where you're like, okay, this team has Patrick Mahomes, he can do anything, but the numbers indicate that this is a very, very bad defense that has not been able to stop any team really this season. And even last week against the Washington football team, like the final score looks good. It looks like Kansas City dominated the game. They dominated the second half, but that was a very close back and forth game in the first. Right. Washington was leading that game. I mean, if Kansas City comes out sluggish like that, again, you're not going to be able to get away with that against a Tennessee team that's so much more talented. So I think we just have to kind of blindly go more on Derrick Henry until he gives us a reason not to.
Yeah, I love that one stat I saw that. So Nick Chubb's the second leading rusher in the NFL, and he's actually closer to being 27th than he is to be first. It's just absolutely ridiculous what Derrick Henry's doing this season.
I saw another stat this week too, and I'm struggling to verify it. I heard it on a podcast. So if it's wrong, it's not on me. It's on whoever said it. Derrick Henry, just using yards after contact, would still lead the league in rushing by 65 yards.
Oh my God. That's
it's insane.
Unbelievable.
Insane.
So you got a couple other guys here this week as well. Let's talk about Julio Jones, who he's battling that hamstring injury. All signs pointing to he's going to play. 64.5 is his more or less. He's gone over 65 yards just one time this season. That was back in week 2 against the Seahawks in that disaster of a secondary. He returned Monday night after missing 2 weeks and five targets, 3 catches, 59 yards. So if we're going less on Tannehill, do we have to go less on Julio as well?
The math would indicate that probably. At the same time, though, you look at this KC defense, and it's like if there was ever a week for Julio to get back on track, you would like it to be this one. But we'll see what happens with AJ Brown. I would imagine, it's not like he's dealing with like a hamstring strain. With a few more days, chances are he'll be able to play in this game. Maybe a little bit under the weather still. But that kind of relegates Julio Jones to the number 2 or at the 1B in that offense. I think you're right, though. If we believe that Derrick Henry is going to be carrying the ball 25 to 30 times, he's going to be kind of the heartbeat of this offense. And we probably see another similar output to what we've seen from Julio in 3 of the last 4 weeks, where he's a factor. He's getting targets, but he's not really hauling in that many. He had that one big game at Seattle in week 2 where he went for almost 130 yards. But his other 3 games, he's had exactly 3 catches in each of those. So it hasn't really been quite the impact player that a lot of people thought he would.
Yep, absolutely. And that brings us to a segment of the show this week that I'm very excited to talk about. It's National Tight End Day on Sunday, October 24th. So let's start off with the best tight end in the league, and that's Travis Kelce in this matchup. 89.5 receiving yards is his more or less. If we're thinking Mahomes is going to go more, I think we got to go more on Kelce as well. I mean, he's put up more than 90 in 3 of 6 games so far this season. Tyreek Hill, as we talked about, might be a little banged up, so they got to find their offense and funnel it somehow. And I think Travis Kelce is the guy, right?
I think so too. Yeah, I think the Tyreek Hill situation just hammers this one home. Even if Tyreek Hill plays and looks like himself, I think this is still a favorable number for Kelce. They need to get him going in this game. And again, I keep hammering, this Kansas City Chiefs defense, but the Titans defense isn't much better. So I think this is a great spot for Kelce.
Yep. And then let's move on here. Excuse me. The Baltimore Ravens taking on the Cincinnati Bengals, and the Ravens, they got a superstar tight end of their own, Mark Andrews, 64.5 more or less for him this week. He's been over 65 yards in each of the past 4 games for Baltimore. Lamar Jackson seems like he's kind of taking that next step up as a passer this season. Andrews, a big reason for that. And Cincinnati's pass defense, kind of middle of the road here. They're giving up about 240 yards a game through the air. So I kind of like Andrews to continue his streak of over 65 this week. How do you feel?
Yeah, I feel the same way. We are seeing, I think, a more advanced version of Lamar Jackson, the passer, this year. That's a good observation. But he's still a guy that loves throwing to tight ends. I think he's most comfortable throwing to tight ends. If he's not throwing a long deep ball to Hollywood Brown, it seems like he loves, kind of the safer option in Mark Andrews, kind of the poor man's Travis Kelce, I guess he's emerging as. So I like this one too. I think the Cincinnati defense has certainly improved. I have a hard time wrapping my head around the Bengals being a legit 4-2 team.
It's weird, isn't it?
It is. I mean, they've played everybody tough, even in their losses. They've looked pretty good. But I do think this is a tough spot for them. I think Baltimore, that offense, despite all the losses that they've had due to injury, has not missed a beat whatsoever. And I think I like Lamar and Mark Andrews to carve up that Bengals defense. So we're on the same track here.
All right. And then our last tight end of our 1:00 games is Kyle Pitts, Atlanta taking on Miami. The poor Dolphins. I don't quite get this scheduling here. They go to London last week.
Yeah.
They don't get a bye. They're the only team going to London that does not get a bye right after. So they did something to piss someone off in the league offices. I don't know. Maybe they had the foresight of seeing that the Jaguars were going to beat them. I don't know. I'm just saying. But anyways, Kyle Pitts, 4.5 receptions is his more or less total for this week. I kind of like the more here. We saw Pitts break out against the Jets in London. This Dolphins defense is just a disaster. As I mentioned, they have this weird travel week where they came back from London, so you might factor that in too. And even with Calvin Ridley being back, I don't think that's going to take away too many targets from Pitts. How do you feel?
Yeah, I feel the same way. I would imagine that the more is going to be pretty popular for this one. I think a lot of people have that last game in mind where Kyle Pitts, finally, I think became the guy in that offense that a lot of people thought he would. And of course, you do have to factor in the absence of Ridley in that game. Russell Gage, who is kind of their de facto number 2, has been banged up. But it's still a pretty favorable number. Like the yardage totals weren't big for Kyle Pitts early on, but he was still routinely getting 4 or 5 catches, in most of those games. The target share was pretty impressive. So I think hopefully, you look at that Jets game in London and that unlocks something for Matt Ryan and Kyle Pitts, maybe an increased level of trust. But at the end of the day, I mean, it's really about this Dolphins defense more than anything, right? I mean, I think they have maybe taken the throne from the Jaguars as like the saddest team in the league. Like I know Detroit is still the defeated team right now, but Detroit has at least been in every game and looked like pretty competent. Whereas Miami started the season looking pretty competent and since then has just been on like this steady, like I said, just like really, really sad decline. And now like the fact that there's like open talks about like the guy who's starting at quarterback for you this weekend, like maybe not even being on the team in a week. I don't think that's great for morale. The Dolphins seem to be heading in the wrong direction and Atlanta, it's not like they're going to be a playoff team or anything, but they've started to gradually gain some competence after that rough start.
Yeah, absolutely. And Miami is definitely now the saddest team in Florida for sure.
Yes, so, no question.
Moving on. But I do also like Matt Ryan in this matchup too. His more or less for yardage is 280. I think he's going to blow by that this week. This Miami pass defense is just terrible. They're bottom 4 in the league. And with all of his weapons.
Yeah, I mean, we saw Lawrence go for almost 320. Didn't even have an efficient day. I think that one's almost a no-brainer.
All right. And before we move on to our 4:00 games and our 4:00 tight end, Nick, do you have a favorite tight end of all time?
I also just name some tight ends, guys. Just a couple tight ends.
Tight ends, either ones. I was figuring you were going to throw some Kyle Brady at me, maybe a little Mercedes Lewis.
Yeah. I mean, Kyle Brady was my guy growing up. For that memorable, like kind of 98 to 2004 Jaguars era, where they dominated the league without ever making a Super Bowl. There are just kind of a few names that like guys that I remember picking up in Madden who are like probably not nearly as good in real life as I thought they were when I was 11. Guys like Wesley Walls, guys like Algie Crumpler, guys like Visanthe Shenko.
Loved Algie Crumpler.
Algie Crumpler was a load. He was an absolute load. Leonard Pope, who was kind of had a brief time in the NFL, but he was like a defensive tackle playing tight end. I mean, everybody loves Tony Gonzalez. Everybody loves Antonio Gates, but not everybody loves Algie Crumpler.
I mean, they should. I mean, Kyle Brady was also on that 07 Patriots team that lost to the Giants. Algie Crumpler eventually made his way to New England as well. So a lot of these guys you bring up were also the second fiddle to Gronk after the whole Hernandez situation didn't work out so well. So they kind of tried to figure it out. I mean,
what happened to him?
Yeah, right. Scott Chandler, was another guy that they just tried to bring in there. The only one that seemed to work out was Tim Wright. For the second tight end in New England.
Yeah. I will say in Wisconsin, you still see a ton of Bubba Franks Packers jerseys.
Love that. Love Bubba Franks. Absolutely.
Definitely a guy whose like popularity exceeded his production.
Definitely. Great name. Bubba's just a great name. I mean, it's just
right. Exactly.
So moving on, we do have one more tight end we want to talk about this week, and that's Darren Waller. In the 4:00 matchup, that late window against the Philadelphia Eagles at 4:00, 67.5 receiving yards for Waller. He hasn't been over 65 yards since week 1 when he had that monster week with 10 catches and 19 targets. Taking a big step back, but this Eagles defense, they're giving up the 4th most fantasy points to tight ends this season. So if there's any week for Waller to kind of get it going again, it's against Philly, right?
I think so. This game has kind of thrown me for a loop all week, when you're kind of making your picks and making your bets. I think the Raiders seem to be trending in the right direction. Obviously, I had a really impressive win over a Denver team that, it doesn't look like as great of a win now, maybe as it would have a couple of weeks ago when Denver was, starting the season 3-0. But nonetheless, a really impressive win, after the John Gruden situation. Philly kind of tail spinning right now. But this line is only Raiders -3. So that leads me to believe that there's maybe some sort of lack of belief in this Vegas team right now. But nonetheless, I mean, you almost have to play the law of averages with Waller, right? Where, he's still the focal point of that offense. The numbers might not bear it out over these last few weeks, but he's still a top 2 or 3 tight end in football. He's still the guy that Derek Carr wants to get going. Maybe you have to credit these opponent defenses for doing a good job of blanketing Darren Waller, but he's not going to be going for yards every game the rest of the way. Like you said, this defense of the Eagles has struggled to contain tight ends. I think this is a good week for Darren Waller.
I agree. Let's move on to our spotlight game in that late afternoon window. Bears at the Bucks, and we've definitely heard this before, but again, here we go, another week with the Tom Brady record, right? Largest age gap between starting quarterbacks in NFL history between Brady and Fields. So Brady's number this week is 309.5 for his passing total. Now, no analytics behind this reasoning for me here, but if you're a little superstitious like me, you take a look at Brady's game log, and I see that every other week he goes off for more than 375 yards through the air. And it just happens to be that week 7 is one of those weeks that lines up for Brady to go off. So I'm going more, Nick. I don't know about you.
I love the buck the analytics approach, the every other approach. I am a little concerned about that because it doesn't sound like Antonio Brown's going to be playing in this game. In fact, I'm looking at Rotowire.com, and as of 2 minutes ago, he's been ruled out for Sunday's game against the Bears. Thank you to our Jerry Donabedian for writing that one up, one of our best writers. OJ Howard, who played well last week, is limited. Rob Gronkowski didn't practice on Friday. Sounds like he'll miss another week. So this Tampa Bay offense is still without some of its best weapons. Of course, you still do have Mike Evans and Chris Godwin, pretty nice fallback options that most offenses don't have. But this is a pretty good Bears defense. I think we saw the Packers have some success against Chicago last week. That's fresh in the mind. But I also thought we saw a pretty conservative game plan from the Green Bay Packers, not taking a ton of shots in that game. Tampa Bay could go the other way. But I do think, the Bears will provide at least some resistance for this depleted Tampa Bay team. I don't know that this is a game where, Tampa Bay rolls by 3 touchdowns. I think they win comfortably, but I don't know. I think the Bears can at least provide some resistance. So this might be our first disagreement of the morning, Dan, but I'm going to go less on that number for Brady.
Look at you bringing numbers in and all that kind of stuff.
I know. Hopefully we can edit that out.
Just going to turn off the computer. All right.
I'm cutting in the clip after fuck the analytics and then just more.
Absolutely love it.
I said buck for the record.
On the other side, you got Justin Fields. 220.5 is his more or less number. And for Fields, he hasn't gotten to that yet this year. This would be his highest output. 209 yards against the Lions back on October 3rd was his highest total so far this season. But this Bucs pass defense, pretty shaky, to put it nicely.
Yeah.
So if there's any week for Justin Fields to set his career high for passing yards, it would be this week. And we know, as we always mention, you just can't run on Tampa Bay. So there's only one way to move the football. So I'm going to go more here just because how else are they going to move the ball? Yeah,
this is kind of the classic unstoppable force, immovable object type of thing, where it's like the Bears can't throw the ball, but the Buccaneers can't stop anyone from throwing the ball. So who do you trust more? Fields only got to 200 yards once. That was against Detroit, but he needed only 17 attempts and 11 completions to get there. So he has the big play ability. Obviously likes throwing the ball downfield. They don't necessarily have any great deep ball receivers. There were a couple of throws in that Packers game, watching that full one on Sunday, where he's just heaving it downfield. And you're as a fan of the Packers, you're like, oh my God, there's got to be a receiver wide open. The camera pans and there's like nobody within 30 yards of where the throw goes. So the Bears offense is kind of convoluted right now. It doesn't really seem like it's geared toward Justin Fields' strengths. Like each week they seem to build in a little more comfortability for him. But he hasn't really looked quite as dynamic as we've expected. With that said, the Bears will not be able to run the ball in this game. They're down to their second or third running back again in this game. Not that matters all that much, as evidenced by Dearness Johnson. But I think they're going to probably, stupidly try to establish the run on those first 2 drives, probably go 3 and out. And then I think, as you're alluding to, Dan, basically have to throw the ball every single possession the rest of the way. So I could see Justin Fields getting to a very inefficient, 230 yards in this game.
Yeah, Matt Nagy's going to Matt Nagy. We know that's going to happen at some point in this game. So let's talk about some of Brady's weapons here. Leonard Fournette, 68.5 rushing yards. He's rushed for more than 69 yards just twice this season, but those have come in 2 of the last 3 games. So he's kind of getting rolling a little bit here. And if Antonio Brown's out, that might mean some more touches for Fournette out of the backfield. How do you like that number?
Yeah, I mean, it kind of depends on how you view the game script, right? Like if you think Tampa Bay is going to roll over this Bears team and it's 21-3 at the, midway through the second quarter, then maybe it's bleed the clock and it's Fournette, kind of racking up these rushing yards in the second half. In that scenario, I could see that happening. But the Bears have a good rush defense. They're top 10 in the league in terms of yards per attempt. So for me, it's just a matter of, how many attempts are we talking for Leonard Fournette? He has looked really good lately. I think I actually haven't seen a lot of people saying this, but the Jaguars deserve a lot of credit for making that pick and for developing Leonard Fournette into the back that he has become today. I don't think he'd be where he is without the Jaguars.
Yeah, nothing to do with Tom Brady, right?
Not at all. No,
not at all. Anyways, another guy, one of Brady's favorite targets, Chris Godwin, 71.5 receiving yards, his more or less. As you mentioned, Antonio Brown is out for this one. Mike Evans has been that go-to guy in the red zone, but I mean, just all these receiving options that are either limited or out. Feels like finally Godwin might be able to get it going again here after he's coming off his season low output of just 43 yards last Thursday night against the Eagles. Yeah. So I think just by sheer volume, Godwin's going to be more than 71.5.
Yeah, right. I mean, if your season low is 43, you're still doing okay, especially in an offense where these last couple of weeks, I mean, he's been the third option, right? I mean, Antonio Brown has started to look more like 2017 Antonio Brown, and I think kind of leapfrogged Chris Godwin in that receiving rotation. And obviously you have Mike Evans, who's always going to be the number one. So, even his quote unquote bad weeks are still pretty productive. So I agree with you here. And I also I think the number on MKF is 5.5 for receptions. I think I go more on that one as well.
All right. Love it. Let's double down on Chris Godwin. Moving on, Lions and the Rams, Matthew Stafford taking on his old team, welcoming Dan Campbell and the Lions to Hollywood. I think he's got a rude awakening for Dan Campbell this week and that Lions defense, 290.5 passing yards. I mean, I just feel like Stafford's going to try to show them up this week. It just has all the makings for that.
Yeah.
With him and Cooper Kupp together, they're just unstoppable right now. I mean, look what they just did to the Giants last week. So
yeah,
this game could get out of hand quickly though, which is my only concern for that 290 number. What do you think?
Yeah, arguably the best QB receiver combo since Brunell and McCardell. I've seen a lot of people saying that these last couple of weeks. No, I'm with you. I mean, there's still in the back of my mind, there's still this 1% thought of could the Lions somehow keep this game close? What are the Rams going to try to go too hard and make this we got your quarterback game and we're going to, embarrass Jared Goff and it kind of goes sideways. But I don't know, the talent disparity is just too much at the end of the day. Stafford has looked a little shaky. I feel like these last couple of weeks, he looked a little better in week 6, but the previous 2 weeks was just missing a lot of the throws that he was making early on. But if there's ever a secondary or a defense to get back on track against, it's this one of the Detroit Lions. So yeah, I think you got to go more here. I mean, the Rams will have the positional advantage at pretty much every single offensive position versus that Lions defense. The only question is if this game becomes too much of a laugher early on, do we see maybe some limited action for Stafford or limited attempts in the second half? But in that scenario, there's a pretty good chance that he has a massive first half and is able to go over that 290.
I can't believe you went all the way back to Brunell and McCardell and skipped right over David Garrard and Jimmy Smith. I just can't believe you did. So anyways, moving on here, I just do want to touch on Cooper Kupp quickly. 4.5 is his receiving yard total. He's been under 90 yards just one time this season, which is just truly remarkable. He's tied for the league lead in receptions, and he trails Devontae Adams by just 15 yards for the league lead in receiving yards. So more or less 94.5 Cooper Kupp.
I mean, this is almost like the Derrick Henry of receiving, right? Where you could say less, but you'd have a tough time justifying why you would be going less, especially against the Detroit Lions. The biggest thing to look for is just targets, right? He has had double-digit targets in every single game, and that means a lot more when you have a good quarterback in Matthew Stafford throwing the ball. If you're being targeted 12 times by Justin Fields, you might only catch 5 of them. If you're being targeted, 12, 13 times by Matthew Stafford, you might catch 8 or 9 of them. So I think he keeps it rolling this week. It's a high number, certainly. He's gone under that number just once, like you said. That was against Arizona in week 4, and that was a game that got away from the Rams early, and they just look completely out of sync and were playing from behind the whole game. I don't see this one going that way against Detroit.
Yep, I think this one's got all the makings for another Dan Campbell crying at the podium post game.
Yeah, but kind of a different tone of crying. Yeah.
Yep. So let's move on. Sunday Night Football. Colts, Niners, Carson Wentz, 230.5 is his more or less total. He's been more than 231 passing yards in 3 of 6 games. And then in 2 of those other games that he didn't, he finished with 223 and 228. So he's been right around this number. The Niners pass defense, though, is top 10 in the league, 217 yards per game they're allowing through the air. But it feels like Carson Wentz might be on the rise, and that him and Frank Reich have kind of recreated that magic that they had going in Philly a couple of years ago. So I kind of like the more here for Wentz. How do you feel?
Yeah, this is a really tough one. This is probably the most difficult line, I think, that we've talked about so far today. It's tough to get a read on both these teams, right? I think the Colts looked like kind of a disaster early on. 2 weeks into the season, both of Carson Wentz's ankles are sprained. But ever since then, he's come back and looked pretty competent. I think he's played probably his 2 best games of the year these last 2 weeks. But you do have San Francisco coming in off of a bye, a much needed bye. Like, as always, they're completely banged up. But you have an extra week to prepare. You have an extra week to get healthy. So I do think we'll get a nice effort from this Niners defense. The number is right on the border for me, but considering I think they're going on the road to San Francisco in this game, right?
Yep.
I think they are. I mean, you're going cross-country road trip. That team's coming off a bye. I think I'll go just less here, kind of putting my money on this Niners defense.
I mean, the Colts are coming in off of playing the Texans, which is practically a bye. So
that is true. It's a confidence building bye.
Exactly. So on the other side, you got Jimmy Garoppolo, 225.5, which is his more or less number. He's going to be back after missing a couple of weeks with I think it was a calf, some sort of leg injury that he had going on there. Jimmy G's just always hurt. He is the glass man of the NFL. But Kyle Shanahan expects him to be 100%. Trey Lance hasn't practiced this week, so I don't think he's going to get vultured anywhere. Colts defense giving up 255 yards per game through the air. So I think this has all the makings for Garoppolo to kind of get over 225 as well.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, it's kind of a matter of how healthy is that calf, how much are they willing to unleash him, not only coming off of the injury, but just in general. That's kind of always been a question with Jimmy G, is like, how much is he trusted in this offense to make downfield throws? We saw a very conservative approach when Trey Lance was under center, a lot more, relying on the running game. I think that's what Kyle Shanahan and the Niners would prefer to do. The question is, will they be able to run it against this Colts team that has had a pretty good, slightly above average run defense on the season? If that's shut down early and you have to put the ball in Jimmy G's hands in the second half, then I think he could cruise to this over. But I do think San Francisco is going to try to establish the run in this game. I think it's going to be a close game. I could see it being fairly low scoring. This is one that I've gone back and forth on all week in terms of how I think it's going to play out. But I do think it's going to be a game that's decided on the ground. I think, both these teams could finish scoring like under 25 points. So I'm going to go less on Jimmy G. I think I'm going to disagree with you on this one.
All right, let's kind of do a little rapid fire here and go through some of the skill positions. You got Jonathan Taylor, 68.5. He's been over that number just 2 times this season, but those have come in each of 2 of the last 3 weeks. Kind of feels like he's getting the ball rolling a little bit as well. And so what do we think of Jonathan Taylor?
Yeah, I think you got to go more here. He's looked really good these last couple of weeks. Still doesn't have a game, with 20 carries, which, that's not the end of the world, in the modern NFL when most teams have 2 or 3 backs that you're rotating in. But he's looked really, really good. And you see every single week, you see, fantasy Twitter saying like, please feed this guy the ball. And they've been semi-reluctant to continue doing that. But he's been effective, catching the ball too, had that long touchdown against Baltimore early in that game in week 5. He's easily their most dynamic option. I think I'd like him to keep it going as well. And he is a Wisconsin Badger, of course. So I think I'm actually contractually obligated to take more on whatever the prop would be.
No bias here whatsoever.
Not at all.
Deebo Samuel, 68.5 receiving yards. Deebo still top 5 in the NFL in receiving. And he's had a bye, which is pretty impressive from this guy. I mean, just look at the target shares, no less than 8 targets in any game so far this season. If I'm going more on Garoppolo, I got to go more on Samuel. What are you doing?
Yeah. Man, if I'm going less on Garoppolo, I guess that means I got to go less on Samuel, right? I think he's been so impressive. I mean, his 2 big games against Detroit and against Seattle are like 2 of the more impressive individual performances we've seen all season. And even in that Green Bay game, which he finished 5 for 52, no touchdowns, nothing really jumps off the page there, but some of the catches that he was making late in that game, contested catches on Jair Alexander, where, Alexander is basically interfering with him and he's still pulling it down. The strength, speed, quickness combo that Deebo Samuel has is pretty much unmatched at the receiver position. So as much as I love him, as much as I'm hyping him up, if I'm going less on Garoppolo, I got to go less on Samuel.
All right. And then last guy here, T.Y. Hilton, 3.5 for receptions. T.Y. made his season debut last week against the Texans, had 4 catches for 80 yards. So does he get to the 4 again this week?
I don't know. I don't think so. I think you can't judge really anything off of that Houston defense. That's an ideal time to make your debut if you're
preseason game,
right? Is on the pseudo bye week. I think I got to go less here. I think he's facing a much more difficult test in the Niners defense. Having a guy like that back is huge. It seems like he should be 36 years old at this point, but he's still kind of in the tail end of his prime age-wise. That is a big weapon to have back for Carson Wentz and for that offense. But I trust the San Francisco defense in this game, and I think they're able to get a handle on Hilton.
All right, very good. Anyone else you like here this weekend, Nick?
I haven't really surveyed the board in depth other than the picks that we're lined up to do here. It's just nice to not have the Jags to worry about this week. Normally I'd have a bunch of Jags props fired off here, but I'm looking forward to just relaxing and watching football and not just being either really worried watching the Jags game or super upset the rest of the day after they lose.
Well, good for you. Very good. I'm happy for you. All right,
Thanks,
Nick, where can they follow you?
You can follow me at Whalen, but the L is a 1. We've gone over this week to week. I feel worse and worse every time I say it. It's kind of a mouthful, but WHA1EN.
All right. And you can follow me at Dan Watkins Radio. Thanks for watching, guys. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button to the Monkey Knife Fight YouTube page, and we'll talk to you next week.